afternoon from Ohio, but I am out in West Coast today, so I'm excited to be in the morning time finally for one of these roundtables. But we're looking forward to a great day today, and I'm glad that you chose to be on this. This month has been a great month on revitalization, and we have a really special panel today that Josh is going to announce in just a few moments. And I want you to pray for Kylie, if you would, please. Kylie came down with COVID, and she's pretty sick. And so she was doing some traveling for the network, meeting with some folks. And while she was meeting, she met with someone that had COVID. And so she's down right now. She could really use her prayer. So I thought if we could just do this as we begin today, we're going to get right into the panel. We're going to skip announcements, get right into the panel. So as soon as we pray, Josh is going to take over. But could we just take a moment and ask the Lord to bless this panel today and give us some wisdom, but also take some time and pray for Kylie today as well. I know she'd appreciate that. So again, I want to thank you for being on today. I know this is going to be valuable, but let's not go any further until we pray. So Rob Redlin, would you be willing to unmute yourself, pray for us today, pray for Kylie, and then Josh, if you'll take it from there.
Lord, we come before you today and just ask that you would be with Kylie right now. We are so grateful for the kingdom ministry that she has here in the network. Lord, I pray that you just touch her body, give her healing, be with her husband as well. May he not get it. And if he has it, would you give him healing? Lord, I pray for the panel today. I thank you for it. The things that we're going to hear and learn, I pray that we'd be able to implement. I know it's something that I need as well. So Lord, I pray that you give wisdom today, give healing where it is needed. I know there's probably folks on here that have people in their church that have COVID right now, and I pray for healing for them. So be with Kylie, be with our time together today. I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Good to see each and every one of you guys today. I finally got my Idea Network trucker hat, which is a gift, I guess, from Kylie and Courtney. So thank you guys for sending it out. It is good to see each and every one of you today. Be in prayer, not only for Kylie, but of course for Logan, our dear brother Tony's son. He continues to battle his cancer and has finished up his treatments, which we're thankful for. But he has some scans today that are very important. Our family continues to pray for Logan, and Tony's on here today. We love you, Tony. You don't have to pipe in or say anything, but we want you to know that we as a community love you, and we're praying for Logan, all of us, each and every one. Today's going to be a great conversation. Today's all about revitalization, and that's what the entire month has been. We're foregoing the announcements of all sorts of things, even though I will say, I have to say it, if you haven't yet signed up to come out to San Antonio, the excitement of that is starting to get palpable. Even for my wife and I, we're talking 2 months from now, we're going to be hanging around the Riverwalk in San Antonio, going and visiting the Alamo and having a great time in that community. Very, very exciting stuff. And we're going to have a great time. I hope you can come out. Who was it, Courtney, that won that free hotel night? Someone won a free hotel night last week. She'll be able to look that up and let us know, but somebody did. And it's going to be great. I hope you're able to come out to that. Now, today, gentlemen, we're going to have a great opportunity to hear from some of our great revitalizers. Several of them have doctorates. Only one of them likes to talk about it inside of their profile. That's Dr. Tommy Thompson. We'll begin with him. We want you guys to introduce yourself. Now, if you're in the midst of a revitalization project, or if you are thinking about revitalization, or, and I hope this comes up, thinking about supporting a revitalizer, this discussion is for you. All of us can be involved in revitalization. And I like to begin with Dr. Tommy Thompson, my pal, because Tommy is taking over a church that genuinely needs some revitalization in a lot of ways. Then I'm going to introduce each and every one of our panelists, and they're going to introduce themselves, tell you about where they're ministering, something unique about themselves, and why they are involved in a revitalization project. Today's conversation as a whole is entitled, are you considering, or should you consider getting involved in a revitalization project? My goal, my thesis by the end of today, is that every single one of us would decide to be involved in church revitalization, not just for a few. But let's go ahead and begin with Tommy. Introduce yourself, if you will.
Tommy Thompson, here in Chicago at Ashburn Baptist Church. And fun fact, those of you that know me know I love coffee and running marathons. And on this panel today, because I'm neck deep in church revitalization, doesn't get any better than that. Most of you that know my story know that I am the second pastor in the 70-year history of this church, following a 68-year founding tenured pastor, which is just unreal. And it brought every challenge that you could think. It was exceedingly and abundantly more. But God has given us wisdom, having done it one other time before here at Grace Baptist in Florida. And so just wrapped up a DMin in church revitalization. And I did that because I wanted more tools in my toolbox for this ministry, and also certified in coaching now for church revitalization. So it's my wheelhouse. I love it and glad to be a part of it.
This is Tommy's passion. If you've ever talked with Tommy one-on-one on this, you really need to schedule that conversation. I'm really excited because next week, Roundtable is all Tommy, and Tommy's going to be sharing something called developing a directional plan to revitalize your evangelism and discipleship. So do you have a specific intentional directional plan about evangelism and discipleship for a revitalization project? That's all next week. We're looking forward to that. Well, the next person on our panel that I want to introduce you to is Brian Sams. Brian, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey everybody, I'm Brian Sams. I am the senior pastor at River City Baptist Church here in Jacksonville, Florida. I came to Jacksonville in the summer of 2016, so this is the middle of my 6th year. The church when I came was called Harvest Baptist Church, and it had been in about a 20-year decline, probably capped with a major church split. And actually the church had not finished splitting before I came. So I got to enjoy kind of the final church split when I got here. The fun fact, I guess, I don't know if it's fun, but it's a cool fact. We have 5 kids and 4 of them are adopted. I just closed the adoption on our 3 babies. So I'm 43 years old and I have a 1-year-old. So that's my fun fact, I guess. But since we've come, the church had about 50 or 60 people and was completely divided and broken. We had a very poor location, poor facilities. And in the last 6 years, we've been able to see the church renamed, relocated, and, reaching lots of people with the gospel. We have seen a change in the spirit. Financial giving has been completely reversed. The membership is up now. I think it's about 240 members right now. And we were also, but I think there's even a bigger story. Those things are all cool, but we were able to transform a culture from an old dated culture to a new culture that's actually engaging and reaching our community. And so I guess that's why I'm here.
I love it, Brian. Thank you so much. That is why you're here, and we're glad to have you on the panel. I was working with Cody Cool here in Las Vegas, and a random church in the middle of Michigan reached out to Cody and stole him out from underneath our team. And what God did to bring Cody out to Michigan has been genuinely a beautiful situation. And their church has experienced growth and honestly, Cody, I know you're not, you don't like to brag, but I really want you to highlight the last 3 or 4 years, you've seen some crazy growth. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell people about your situation?
Sure. Yeah. 11 years ago, I left sunny Las Vegas and bought an igloo in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Took a little church of about 20 people. And this was in 2010. This is when the 2010 census came out, and every state out of 50 had lost in population. And Michigan was the only state that or every state gained in population. Michigan was the only state that lost in population. So everybody was asking me, why would you move to Michigan? I said, I don't know. But now that being here, it's like, I'm just so thankful that God moved me here. It was really out of ignorance. I didn't know what I was doing. And so for the last 11 years, this December 5th, we'll have been in Grand Rapids. We're now called the GR Church, gr.church. So our name and our website are kind of the same. Makes it more memorable. We've just over the last 10 years, slowly and steadily reached people, discipled people. We conformed a clear mission. We've elevated the mission, downplayed our preferences, and I've been revitalized personally through pastoring and through the scriptures, and we've gotten to a place now where we're reaching quite a few more people than I was expecting when we came here. So it's been really good.
I love it, man. So glad to have you. Robbie Green has been part of the network, man, for many years now. In fact, we just came back from Mastermind together, had a great time. And Robbie has been revitalizing a project, a church. The church was in a good situation, had a great pastor, but in reality, needed to be taken to the next step. Robbie, would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, Robbie Green, and I'm in the Dallas, Texas area, Levandri Baptist Church. Kind of like Tommy, I followed a very long tenured pastor. He was here 50 years before I became pastor. Worked for him for 17 years. So that had its own unique challenges, its own unique benefits as well. We were not near as much a church in decline as much as we were just very stagnant. We had declined some years earlier, but then leveled off and just stayed at a very stagnant place for many years. We were in trouble financially. We did not have clear processes, clear systems, clear anything, and our facilities were huge and all in bad shape. And so that's kind of what I walked into 8+ years ago. And so God's been good. We have just finished last year a multi-million dollar renovation project on our facilities. That also gave us the impotence needed at that moment to really move forward and change a lot of philosophical things here in the church to conform to a more effective model and 21st century model. And so God's been very good, and I'm very thankful for what he's done. I love church revitalization. It's also a passion of mine as well in ministry.
We're glad to have you, Robbie. And today we have Aaron Flanagan on the panel who's joining us. Met with Aaron this morning. We were talking about this panel. I said, man, I'd love for you to share some of these thoughts in the panel itself. Aaron pastors across town from me in Las Vegas, Nevada. Has become one of my dearest friends. Is actually my personal accountability partner. So he's got the dirt on this guy. I love him dearly and thankful for him. He took over a church that was really in the midst of a church split whenever he was able to come into leadership there, and had to clean up some situations. But we're really thankful that he's on the panel to talk about that. Maybe that's your situation. Maybe you're finding yourself in a church revitalization where there's some discontent and maybe some problems going on. Aaron, introduce yourself and why you're on the panel today.
Aaron Flanagan, Oasis Baptist Church in the Vegas Valley, Henderson area here. And I guess why I'm here, I don't know. Josh, I'm a friend of Josh's, I guess, but no, I've been at Oasis for 15 years, and it was about 9 years ago, actually, last weekend, 9 years ago, the pastor that I was serving under resigned, and it wasn't a good resignation, but he resigned, and I kind of say I was the last guy standing. And so I sat in a meeting on a Friday and on a Saturday, and well, I got a phone call on a Friday. On a Saturday, I got the word that the pastor was resigning, and a gentleman about 3 people down from me said, well, Aaron's here, Aaron's ordained, and he can do this. And so I said, well, we'll have church. And so you know, the long and short of it there is the next week he spoke on Sunday, resigned, and I was speaking the next week. So mine is maybe different than some in that I didn't come into a church. I was already at the church. But some of my difference was I don't really have I didn't have a pastoral desire. I had no desire to pastor a church. I was a youth guy. I was a music guy. I loved all of it. But when I came in, it was just, we were at a peak of about 600 or so. At the time when I took over, we were probably 250, 300, maybe somewhere in that ballpark. Things were declining. We were in about a $7.5–8 million debt situation with the building, and people were hurting. A lot of infighting, a lot of arguing and fussing over some things that had financially, really a lot of it was just financial And so over the course of now almost exactly 9 years ago this weekend, actually Sunday will be 9 years ago that I spoke my first sermon, I guess you would here, but just been able to see God do an amazing work. The challenge of building people that were hurt, that didn't want to serve, and cleaning the buildings by ourselves with our family, and because people were just done and they were burnt out. But last year, about a year ago today, we became debt free. We had about 5 years ago, we moved out of the facility into the facility we're in here, paid cash and did those things. So God's been so good to us. And it's just been a joy to be a part of the process as much as anything, to pour into people's lives and to be a part of what God has been doing. So maybe a simple introduction there.
Man, we're glad to have you, Aaron. We really are thankful for your testimony here in the Valley, what you've done there at Oasis, and in the hearts and the lives of so many people in the city. So, okay, let's jump right into it, guys. You're neck deep in the midst of a church revitalization project. For some of you, you have a heart for church planting like I do. I am deeply into church planting, love church planting. We do a church planting summit or a luncheon every 2 years with the Idea Network. We have one coming up here in January of 2023. We're going to have more and more of that. We love that. And if I were to plant more churches in my life, man, this would be a dream come true. But the reality is there are an incredible amount of churches out there that are just dying on the vine. Resources, finances, buildings, land, and people who need pastors to come in and help. So the question really begins to these guys as we've introduced the panel. You are neck deep in the middle of a revitalization project. Why should a pastor consider taking a church in need of renewal and revival? Why should they? I mean, here they have opportunity. The opportunity of going and planting a brand new church, the opportunity of going on staff somewhere. We don't know the lives of each and every one, the hearts of each and every one of these men. God's stirring in their heart for a change, for something new. And they're thinking to themselves, church revitalization, why? Let's go ahead and begin with Sam. Sam, would you share with us the why? Why is church revitalization important? Why should we consider a church revitalization project?
Yeah, sure. I would say that church revitalization is it's revival is at its core. From a biblical perspective, you're talking about a church's candle that's going out, and the opportunity to come in and see something brought back to life for me was the compelling reason. I left California in 2016, and I didn't know what I was doing, had no idea where I was going, had all kinds of opportunities that presented themselves. A lot of them were larger ministries with Christian schools, and even one with a college affiliation. And as I just was processing what I really felt like my gifts were and what I really wanted to do, I just scripturally became convinced that I wanted to take a place that needed leadership, that needed direction, and that if we could avoid another building closing, another piece of Christian turf being turned into something else, I wanted to be a part of that. So God used Isaiah 58:12 in my life. They that shall be of you will raise up the old waste places. You'll be a repair of the breach and restore the paths to dwell in. And that verse became my verse. And so I just started praying that God would show me a door of real brokenness that I could walk into. And I surely found that.
There are guys watching right now and people that are going to be watching the replay on the Facebook group later on, and they're really interested in this question. Tommy, what would you say? Why should someone even consider taking a church in need of renewal, revival, and revitalization?
It's a great question, and I recently wrote about it actually on my website. What I am firmly convinced of, and that is that it's my opinion that church revitalization is the greatest need of the 21st century church. And that's not just my opinion, that's based on data. 8 out of 10 churches, you've all heard these statistics, 8 out of 10 churches need revitalization. Over 4,000, I think it's closer to 5,000 churches are closing annually. And so what does that mean? It means we're never, first of all, ever going to be able to outpace the church's closing with church planting. It's impossible. And that's to me one of the most stark realities, is that there are far more churches closing than there are being planted each year. And so that's something that stuck out to me early on. I didn't seek church revitalization. Like Brian, I just, churches reached out and asked me to come, and as God ultimately led, I stepped into those positions, only to really learn after the fact, kind of like Brian says, your giftedness. Robbie and I have talked extensively about this, that you kind of realize and acknowledge your gifting as the years roll on, that you're kind of wired for it. But why should someone consider revitalization? Because number one, even though I think gifting can be different between planting and revitalization, I think they both require grit. And I think there's a misnomer or a myth sometimes that it's easier to plant than it is to, the old saying is it's easier to give birth than raise the dead. And I think that's just it's a misapplication of biblical truth. I love Brian bringing the theological approach to this, that at its core, revitalization is revival. And, we can't just walk away from dying churches or dead churches and say, well, we'll just go start something new. Christianity is already in a mess, and it's going to be even in a bigger mess if pastors don't look at these opportunities. And it goes against the grain, because normally leaders like to, if their next step in ministry, most guys are looking for something bigger and better than what they're coming out of. I love what I was able to do at Grace, and what I'm doing here is take broken situations and watch them come to new life again. And I think and we'll get to this later in the questions, it's a beautiful reward to watch churches come full circle and have new life again. And it's the same biblical process, whether it's planting, replanting, or revitalization. It takes courage, it takes grit, it takes perseverance. And so guys, I would challenge you, just don't always think that planting is the answer. There are communities, as Josh said, there are churches in communities all across this country that have buildings and resources, and all they need is people to go in with some love and tactical, strategical patience and lead those churches into new life.
Okay, so all of that's well and good. And I'm sitting over here thinking, yeah, I agree with the data. And I agree with the stories of revitalization and the idea that it's revival. I even agree with Sam's theology, which is, unique for me sometimes, I guess. Okay, I agree with all of this. Here's the problem, the challenges. When I, from my perspective, heard growing up, and I heard this throughout college, raising the dead, or giving birth is easier than raising the dead, I get it. And so I look at a revitalization project and I think, I'm going to be dealing with a lot of incompetent people who are very angry, and I have to turn all that around. Maybe I'll go find some friends and go start something in my garage, right? Cody, the challenges are real, especially the older you get. You begin to hear from other pastors the challenges they face, and it can be scary. The courage has to be there. Let's go ahead and just address those challenges head on instead of ignoring the fact that they are there. If you were to say the two most difficult challenges of a revitalization project are, what would you say they are? Two most difficult challenges of a revitalization project.
Well, Josh, when I got saved at 21, I just went right into ministry, was mentored right away. And then I got thrown into ministry after college and started working for Adam Zamora, working with him. And then after that, I started working for you. So for almost 5 years, I got to work with Pastor Josh Tice and Fred Murray and Jason Combs and all these guys. And it was so exciting. We got to, when we showed up at the office, there's a lot of synergy and excitement and vision and development. That was a lot of fun. I think one of the most difficult challenges of revitalizing a church, especially a smaller one, is just simply being alone. It was really difficult, as I would end up dumping a lot of my problems and issues onto my wife, which I quickly learned not to do. And I just go in the office, it'd just be me, and developing discouraged people, especially in a revitalization where the church has been on a downhill slope for a long time. And so that was really difficult, and I'd shovel snow in the middle of the night in Michigan. By the way, go blue. I think I saw some Ohio State thing. That's disgusting. So anyway, I it's like shoveling snow in the middle of the night and I didn't even have snowshoes. I had to put bread bags over my socks and then shoes because I'd come home with my feet wet. And then I'd go to the church office and work. And there was just nobody there. It was a really lonely time, but it was a great time for me to connect with God. And so there's just something energizing about working with somebody else. When I hired Josh Hassel, everything changed. It just seemed like the work doubled. There was more synergy. There's more excitement. I think the second biggest issue or difficulty is building ministry synergy, because a church revitalization oftentimes lacks what most people are looking for in a church. When people come to visit a church, they're expecting all of the ministries to at least be at par. And oftentimes in a church revitalization, they're not even at par. And so they'll move on to another ministry. And I'm always thinking, if you guys would just stay, we would get there. And finally, as the flywheel or as the wheel would start turning, like it's just accelerated the growth of our church and the impact it's making in our community. But it's taken us 11 years to finally get there. It's just a long, arduous process.
Aaron, you experience different challenges, or maybe you can validate some of the ones that Cody mentioned. What would you say those two greatest challenges that you faced in the midst of a revitalization project that you've been in?
Well, I think for mine, again, being a little bit different because I was in the church. So I already had relationships. So I didn't have to build relationships, but because I already had some of that. But, I could echo everything really that's been said from, Tommy to Cody to like each one of these conversations or these statements, the patience aspect of it that was mentioned, the revival. But, definitely what Cody mentioned with being alone. I know early on, to walk into an office on a Saturday to be said, I'm resigning tomorrow and you're speaking the next week. So that Monday was like, okay, what does that even mean? What does that mean? So I would say for me personally, I was wrestling with this thought even earlier when you mentioned some of this to me. Because for me personally, there was so many personal inadequacies of me getting through who I was. And I don't know if there's anybody out there that's kind of dealing with my situation, but I still don't have the pastoral degrees. I have a college degree from Liberty that basically I was a youth pastor, and that was the quickest and easiest way out of college. So I don't have the degrees. I didn't sit under somebody that took me through the ropes of what it is to be a pastor, to make leadership decisions and that from that element. And so I had to and it took me time just to figure out who I was as a man, as a pastor. I'm a father. I have 4 children. I'm taking on this role of something that I have no idea. I felt like I said it over and over. To the point that for me, it was getting past myself and the inadequacies. And people would say, Aaron, stop making excuses and just go and lead and trust and those things. So some of it was just a personal. I had to get through my own head to then go, hey, I'm okay. This is where God has me. And I'm good to do that. Now I'll go and lead. Another thing for me personally was just a clear vision. Cody mentioned that church synergy. I wanted to, hey, all right, this is over. Let's go. Let's brush under the rug. Now let's move forward. And it couldn't, having meetings with people that would say, how can you sit here when you were here for the last 5 years? How did you not know any of this? And so walking through all of that, but truly getting to the place where there was a clear vision. I didn't have a clear vision for years, other than I hope somebody comes to church tomorrow, and I hope that we can pay a bill tomorrow. Calling, a lawyer to say, we're going to have to work this out. I don't know what that's going to look like. And so to do that, but then to try to take a church that was hurting and say, hey guys, let's go conquer the world. And it was like, so how do I do that? Well, I think for me, it just came to a place I didn't necessarily have the clear vision of how we were going to conquer all of our community. but it was coming to a place of understanding. Be faithful where you are, remain where you are, seek the Lord. And in your alone times, fortunately, I had people like you that came along several months into that process. Pastor Gotthard came along, but you know, it was several months of me not having a clue of anything, of just hoping that somebody would come. And so I would say those two things. For me, some of it was just getting out of my own head, and then that clear vision that was just I struggled with for a long time, other than just being faithful right where I was.
Maybe some of you are out there feeling the exact same way. Some of us come to the pastorate in a different way. And Aaron has told me multiple times, I was suddenly a pastor. I didn't want to be a pastor, never asked to be a pastor. Here I'm a pastor. And God was like, this is your assignment now. Maybe that's where you're at. Maybe you're like, I don't know what I'm doing because I never planned on doing any of this. And God said, no, you're exactly the right man for this position. And I want to say just one practical application. I'm telling you, I can say this on behalf of Aaron. Contact this man, Aaron Flanagan, and walk through the process that he walked through. God placed him there, and owning that has been so good for him, the church, and our city. Robbie Green, each and every single one of our revitalization projects are going to have different challenges. What have been the challenges that you face? You say two primary challenges of a revitalization project.
So we faced two very distinct challenges. Number one, we were the flagship poster child independent Baptist church in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. And we had hundreds of people that were still living in yesteryear thinking that Levon Drive was at the peak of its game, and it had been in decline for a long time and stagnant for a long time. And so to bring a group of people that love the Lord, but were very comfortable in living in the past. I love history. I love what God has done, but I got to the place I thought if I hear one more time what we used to do, I'm going to scream, because that's all we had to compare to. There was nothing fresh happening. There was nothing new happening. So changing the culture, that it takes time, it takes determination, it takes willpower. And ultimately God's grace and God's help. God has to change the culture. I think the second thing that was a real challenge for us is we were flat broke. And when I say we were broke, I mean, we had a $200,000 offering the first month in my pastorate. We pushed and we had this $200,000 offering. And the business manager came to me on Monday morning and said, that's great. We're only $500 in the red now. I'm like, what? We just took up a $200,000 offering and we're $500 in the red. We had no money, and our facilities were absolutely slap wore out. I mean, ripped carpet. When it rained on a Sunday, we would have over 30 trash cans in the worship center collecting water from a leaking roof. It looked like God worked here 30 years ago, not today. Though, and those, both of those challenges are, you can overcome them in time with God's help and God's grace, but those are not quick fixes. Like you know, Tom Rainer talks about looking for the low-hanging fruit. There was no low-hanging fruit. It was just all, and Tommy knows what I'm talking about. I mean, it was uphill, and it was just, I woke up many days and thought, God, why me? Why here? Why now? And so God knows what he's doing, and you just rest in him and trust in him.
You know, the situation you describe is something I'm sure a lot of us can face. Also, the next question is something that each and every one of us, I'm sure, have wrestled with, the biggest mistakes we've made in ministry. Anybody here, part of the round table, ever make a mistake that you wish you could go back and redo? Anybody raise your hand? A few of you, except for Rob Redland, has not yet made a mistake. It's because he doesn't know of all the mistakes we've seen him make. We'll let him know later. I want to know that in your revitalization project, obviously so much opportunity there, but what is the biggest mistake you've made thus far in your revitalization? What do you think, Brian?
I think the first thing I would say is I underestimated how challenging a philosophical revitalization would be. You got to understand this about revitalization. every church that needs revitalized is dying or divided. Okay. There's one of those two things happening. And there are reasons why that is true. Particularly in my case, I took what would be a historic, fundamental independent Baptist church with even a Hiles Anderson edge, if that helps anybody understand kind of where we were from. No pants on women, no screens, hymns out of this, Sword of Lord magazines were still in the lobby when I got here. And I just thought, well, I mean, they're going to just love me and they're going to love the new vision. And, I will promise anybody that wants to do this, if you're going to take a church of that nature, you're going to get pummeled. You will not be the exception to the rule. And I think that's the first thing. Huge mistake thinking that a philosophical shift is not going to come at a high price. That's first thing. Second thing, huge mistake. I over involved my wife in ministry because she was the only person here. I mean, she was my partner. We roll in, we're painting the walls, we're running the children's ministry, we're renovating the nurseries, we're hosting all the guests, we're doing everything. And 5.5 years into this, I just had to pull my wife out of all ministry roles because of some real challenges that we faced from her physically and emotionally. We adopted multiple kids. We went from a 19,000 square foot building to a 50,000 square foot building, to half acre to 7 acres, and this ministry just blossomed. And the thing was, I never saw the need to back my wife off of certain things. But see, that was a problem I created at the beginning. At the beginning, I shouldn't have immersed her so strongly in it. I should have let her play the role of wife and mom a little bit better. And I think that would have been more healthy for us.
It's interesting, the women that God allows us to do ministry with. I'm in the midst of writing an article right now. I'm starting blogging back up in 2022. And we're talking about, with Idea Network specifically, the 3 types of women that we want to help in the Idea Network. Number 1 are pastors' wives. Say, oh, pastor's wife, that's everybody connect. No, because there's some people that are just women who happen to be married to a pastor. Mm-hmm. How can we help them? That's a unique type of a person. The second type of a person is somebody who is called to ministry, but they also happen to be married to a pastor. Aren't they a pastor's wife? Well, kind of, but they are just deeply involved in ministry. They're not just married to the pastor. And then there's this third type of person. This would be like Courtney or Kylie. They're a woman who is called to ministry, but they're not married to a pastor. And they serve in ministries, right? But they're not necessarily a pastor, but they're called to. All 3 types of women that I didn't have. And what I find fascinating about all 3 types, Brian, is that the 3 types are misunderstand each other and sometimes are intimidated by the other. Mm-hmm. The woman called to ministry who marries to a pastor is often intimidated by the home life and the ability and the strength of the motherhood and the wife ability of this kind. And this guy's intimidated by this one, and this one's intimidated by this one. It's amazing. But going forward, our Idea Network really wants to minister to all 3 of those. I'm in the midst of writing that. And Brian, you're right, man. I made some of those same mistakes early on, pushing her deeply beyond her comfortability level. I'm glad you mentioned that. Tommy, what do you think? Number 2 or number 3? What's the big mistakes that you've made in your revitalization project thus far?
Something I'm not heard anybody touch on yet that I think is very key is I allowed in my first 2 years, because we were a larger established church that had been entrenched in such a deep culture, a man-made culture for 68 years. It was a full frontal attack to protect that culture. And so my biggest mistake looking back was not confronting the bullies sooner. And that's something that is very unique to church revitalization. That culture that exists and the power brokers, people stuck in their comfort and preferences. And when you come in and try to lead revitalization, it's on. I mean, it's a full frontal attack. And this is why most guys will try revitalization one time. And after a couple of years, they bail because it just gets too intense. And that would be my second mistake, was coming here, not so much at Grace when I went there, but here I totally underestimated the depth of spiritual attacks and oppression. That, you think you hear horror stories, you read some books, you hear pastors tell stories about, the crazy people standing up in business meetings. For me, it was all that and a bag of chips. So, but what really helped me in this process was I had someone who was a relative, matter of fact, a son to my predecessor, was in a meeting with him one day, and he said, Tommy, he said, you're the pastor, you pastor the church. There's a biblical process to handle these problems. And he said, these problems will only continue as long as you allow them. And I mean, it was a sucker punch. And I realized that there's biblical authority. There's the authority of God in his church. And we can't be afraid when necessary to step forward and lead in those most difficult moments. And some of you that know my story, I stepped up and I led that initiative in June of last year. And I was going to confront and deal with 6 people. And I kid you not, even though I had hard, cold facts to confront and deal with, lies, smear campaigns, physical letters, physical emails, all of that, shared it with our church family because of the relationship and the friendships that go back generations. Even though some people knew I was right and stood in the right on these issues, still sympathized, voted for these people, and they survived disciplinary action. And that was probably my lowest point, but God gave me grace to stay, and we dealt with the same people just a few months later in October of last year. And had I not had the courage to stand and face that, that was a very pivotal point. But because I was just stayed the course and didn't react in fear, but just knew it would need to be done again, and led forward, that October meeting changed the trajectory. Really, the June meeting changed the trajectory. And I look back now and I see how God exposed and helped other people to see things that I was wanting them to see that they didn't see up until that point. So now I wish I would have done some of those things sooner. But, as a pastor's heart, you always want to reconcile. You always want to remedy. You want love to conquer all. And sometimes there's just some foxes in the hen house that nothing is going to change until you root it out.
Yep.
I've been amazed how the lack of boldness has caused more problems in my ministry than me overstating something too quickly. Cody, what do you think, man? What is the biggest problem that you've faced as it relates to the biggest difficulty you faced in this project? It has to do with mute? Oh, that's what
There we go. Sorry about that. Probably trying to keep the establishment happy while trying to reach new souls, catering to this establishment preferences rather than staying on course with the mission.
Good.
We have to downplay our preferences and elevate the mission. And that's a big mistake that I've made. So this is the biggest mistakes. One of them, and I've made many, believe me, they've been huge. Is saying this phrase, I will never. Like I've said this so many times behind the platform. Oh, I'll never do this. I'll never do that. And then I'm eating crow 2 years later. Pastor, you said, I'm like, how do you remember all the things I said I would never say, I would never do? And they remember everything. They bring up sermons from like 8-9 years ago. I don't even remember what I taught back then. Sometimes I'll pull them up and just cringe at what I wrote, but it's that was a big mistake that I've made. I will never do this because you just have to allow God to write your script in your context, in your culture, and just allow God to do what he's going to do through you and your local church, and never say, I will never, unless it's an obvious like doctrinal issue. I'm talking like methodology and maybe even some doctrinal stuff, because, I think most of us here have kind of come out of legalism and are avoiding licentiousness, right? We're like trying to stay here in the middle. And, but that's a big mistake that I've made. And I think one of the big mistakes, I'll just share this, is avoiding making a mistake. You know, it's like part of ministry is going to be mistakes. And some of the greatest ideas that'll come to your ministry are at the end of 5 or 6 mistakes that you make, and you'll never get there unless you make the mistake. And I just think of the guy who hid his talent, and he wasn't punished because he did bad things. He was punished because he did nothing. And I think that's a big mistake people can make, is just to do nothing.
I love it. Aaron, you've been there. I know you personally. You've made a lot of mistakes. Please try to narrow it down to 1 or 2.
I think one that was just jumping out at me was, and it's not really maybe necessarily a huge ministry-wide thing, was just personally just not stopping. And so me just feeling like I have to go 24 hours a day, that I have to be the one that gives every answer to everything going on. And it was about, I guess, about four years into it. And we would do, our vacation was always like 3 to 5 days so that we can come back to preach. And I finally just got to the place of saying, you know what, I'm gone. We're from Ohio, my wife and I both, and we drove to Ohio and took 3 weeks, and we've not stopped doing that since. And one of the greatest things that we ever did, I guess mistakes, was that, we were there every day doing everything. Saturdays, we had about 40,000 square feet with a gymnasium, and almost every Saturday I'm by myself mopping a gymnasium. If you've ever done that, there's a lot of things that go through the head, usually not many that are very spiritual that you would want to have go through your head. But, and it got to that place where I was just tired. I got to that place, I need to stop. So just never stopping, I would say, was just a personal thing, because I was unhealthy for the people, just because I took on so much that I had to stop. And I guess another one, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, being part of a network like this, one of the best taking advantage of opportunities that you have is to look around and ask, who can help me where I'm at right now? You think, well, there is nobody to stand up and speak within my congregation. Well, what about having one of these guys come in? What about having friends within the network come in and step in for you at the pulpit? Maybe another pastor in town, whose assistant can come in and help. But feeling that you can never get away is a short-term strategy that will end up bankrupting your church and your energy enough to continue pastor long-term. So Aaron, I'm really glad you mentioned that. You were going to mention another mistake.
I was just going to say, I think I kind of go along even with one of the things that I had said earlier, some of the challenges just personally. It's a challenge, it's a mistake, but it's also part of the growth, is truly understanding who you are, understanding your personality. I'm a very black and white guy. I'm a very blunt guy. We've had lots of conversations, and you'll say, oh, you really said that. I did. And even, Dan is on here, who works for me, and I'm sure he's went home and gone, I can't believe that he said that. But so really walking through that, understanding, developing, but like I said, some of that's just a part of our growth. And but because of that, going to people and having conversations with people, open mouth, insert foot, several times in one-on-ones or in different conversations. And I know those are just kind of simple, but just things that I've dealt with. I've been pretty fortunate. I've been fortunate to not make the one decision and make that where it's like, oh, we just lost 7 families. God's been good to probably should have had that, but God's been gracious and good to us in that. So I don't know, just a couple simple things there.
Brian Sams had to jump off. He left his message in chat for everyone. Anybody that really would like to reach out to him and speak, please feel free to do so. And that is what this membership specifically is intended to do. It's to elevate you in this network to say, look, we want to prioritize those conversations. So if you need those conversations with an individual like Brian, please feel free to reach out. Robbie Green, what would you say that one singular or secondary mistake that you've seen made in your congregation, in your revitalization project?
I think, first of all, failing to I totally underestimated what the true cost would be. And that's not meant to be discouraging. It's just church revitalization can take everything you've got and then some on top of it. And I think, just totally honest, that I thought, having been here for a number of years, that I would have an advantage in a way that maybe I could take some shortcuts, and that was not the case. So, not parting with church members that needed to go quick enough was a mistake. Not parting with staff members that needed to be replaced was a mistake. I didn't part with them quick enough. And then, interestingly enough, I would say that the second biggest decision that threatened to unravel everything that we had done, God was very gracious. He got us through it. But I stood in front of 1,000 people and promised them that absolutely under no circumstances in a renovation project would we spend a penny more than $6 million. You can take it to the bank. I'll bet my life on it. And by the time the city got finished with me, we were $11 million into a project. And I had to go back to the church. I had to eat a very healthy dose of humble pie. And thankfully, there was at least reasons besides just poor management and just overspending. But that still took a credibility. I mean, there was a hit on credibility that it cost me. We got through it. But it's like everything I had spent the first 5-6 years working hard to prove everybody and get everybody on board threatened to come unravel because of that. So I'd be careful what you promise. I'd, like Cody said, never say never.
So it's very interesting to me because you're talking about diet, really, and Cody mentioned it, you mentioned it. It seems like if you're going to be a revitalizer, you've got to get used to eating crow and humble pie. Quite often, it seems like that's the case with each and every one. And some of you do paint some dire decisions and dire circumstances, difficulties, but still you encourage people to be involved in revitalization projects, obviously, or you would not be here. And because you've already stated it in this panel. So I guess my final question for you each within 60 to 90 seconds, answer this question. What's the most rewarding aspect of church revitalization? Why go through the pain to get to the promise?
Was that open to whoever? Was that me?
Go, Robbie.
Okay. I had no idea. So I'll just tell you, in the last few weeks, I've just been blown away at what God's done. Sunday, seeing a former Muslim person get baptized Sunday morning. Sunday morning, seeing a lady that had spent her whole entire life in Mormonism and gave a clear testimony of how God has radically transformed her life with his grace, and watching her get baptized and watching the whole worship center just erupt in cheering and clapping and screaming and shouting. And I had no idea how exciting it would be on this side of it. We're still dealing with issues. We haven't arrived, but we're at a place now where, by God's grace, seeing hundreds of new people a year come into our church and having momentum and having victories that honestly 8 years ago I just thought was going to be everybody else's victory. And it just is a testament to God's grace. But I think also, if you just stick with it long term and do the same thing that you're supposed to do week in, week out, and just leave the results to God. God takes care of all that.
No, that's good. I would say on my end, it's some of the same. It's the reward that we get to see here on this side of heaven. Obviously, we won't get to see that big picture until glory one day, but it's little pieces. I used to say early on when I took over, I asked a group of our men if we were to shut our doors, would anybody in our community know that we were gone? And when I asked that, if we were to be honest, if we closed our doors, it wouldn't have impacted many people. And today, just 3 weeks ago, and it's not just about the numbers, and it's not about, but my heart is really just to reach. I don't have any intention to reach where Josh is on his side of town. I'm not one that says, well, I'm just here to reach Las Vegas. I want to reach my community, the 3 miles right outside of my doors at our church. And to do a harvest night, and we had a little over 1,000 people show up at our property, which is just a small little strip mall piece. And to hear the statements of thank you for doing this, of thank you for being here, of those kinds of things. You know, obviously the souls that have come to know the Lord, families that were a part of our church that were hurting, now back serving, people that have come and said, you know, we were just looking for a church that was X, Y, or Z, and we found Oasis. Or we were hurting and they came after some of the mess that we had gone through, and now they found our church and were able to feel a home because there was a similar connection with others because they were hurting, and we were able to be a part of that. And so just so many different things. Being on this, it sounds silly, but being here to share a little bit of a story where I'm just a guy that I don't have much to share, but you know, God's allowed us to do many different things, just, and you said it, being faithful, remaining for a period of time and allowing God to use you. Faithfulness has been kind of a statement that I've used for a long time. But
I think the one of the most rewarding aspects of what we do for a living, especially for me, is when I get home, my wife tells me how awesome I am, how amazing. I love that. I'm kidding. That's not what happens. You know, I think when it comes to like the most rewarding part, one of them is entering into a dark chapter in people's lives and seeing God rewrite their script, and then telling that story to other people, giving them hope. Like, God could do that with me. Yeah, God could do that with you as well. And I think that's kind of the theme of revitalization. Like, look what God's done with these guys. Like, God's going to do it with all these other churches that are closing down all across the country. Just get in there. They need leadership. They need a Titus, because churches are bombarded with genealogies and with debate and all these things that just are so toxic to the body of Christ. And they just need good men like you guys to come in and bring revival. So that's exciting.
awesome.
Yeah, something all the guys have said is about something that the joy of watching that shift, that change. And I wrote this down. You know, planting, we all see people saved and baptized, and that's awesome. That's an amazing part of what we get to do week in and week out. I think the thing that is so unique and specific to Church Revitalization is that we're not making just things new. We're taking something that is broken and making it whole again. And I think that's the real distinctive of Church Revitalization. People who, Aaron talked about people who are broken and hurt. Cody mentioned the toxic culture of the past, and people locked into man-made religion and legalism and all these things we've talked about. And there's something, not just people getting saved and baptized, but people who have been locked in that culture. And then you come in and lead through perseverance and just spiritual warfare, leading them into a place of wholeness again, to see them break free from that and then begin to walk in true gospel liberty. There's just something so unique and special about that.
You know, sometimes I think, man, what would it be like to be one of the original disciples? What would it be like to be able to walk with Jesus through Galilee and arrive in Nazareth and watch him heal a blind man or watch him heal a lame man? I mean, to see the miracles of Jesus up close. And then I think sometimes, I wonder if the disciples are up in heaven saying, what would it be like to be Josh and Cody and Aaron and Tommy and Robbie, to watch Jesus do these miracles in hundreds and thousands of people's lives? And the opportunity we've been given to watch the miracles of Jesus up close should never be scoffed at, should never be looked down upon. You have that opportunity, and I'm really thankful for the testimony of these guys. And let me just say as we close, you can trust these men. I know Brian had to take off a little bit earlier, and reach out to them. These are the type of men that would love to have a phone call from you, would love to get an email from you, would love to get together and talk with you. These men are good men. So I want to encourage you to do that. Whether you're watching live right now or you're watching the replay later, reach out to these guys. Number two, I want to say is because support revitalizers. Church planters need your support. I support lots of church planters, but support revitalizers. Could it be possible that God is calling you not only to revitalization, but maybe God is calling and putting on your heart to identify some revitalization projects of people you can send financial support to over the next 12 to 24 months. And then lastly, join us next week as we discuss Revitalization Continued with Tommy Thompson, as he talks about developing a directional plan to revitalize your evangelism and discipleship. That's next week. The week after that, we're going to be Jeremy Rands, the VP of the Idea Network, confronting a church power broker. What exactly do you do when you've got somebody in great amount of leadership who doesn't necessarily have the authority nor the responsibility they wield in that power broker position? That's November the 23rd, going to be great. And then lastly, for the month, November 30th, Sam Rayner is going to lead us in a session called 5 Immediate Updates to Your Aging Facility. All of those are going to be fantastic for you, the Idea Network members. We're so glad that you were here today. We are 1 minute over, so I better let you out. We'll talk to you next week.